I want to give you a quick introduction here, and then I want to get straight into some of your work because it is truly fascinating. Today we have Maria Wheatley, who is a master dowser, archaeologist, speaker, researcher, and author from the UK. With nearly 30 years of experience, she has studied megalithic sites worldwide and is a leading authority on the geodetic earth energies, ley lines, and grid lines. Maria has studied the Neolithic, Bronze Age, and Iron Age at Oxford and Bath University with expert archaeologists. As a second-generation dowser, she combines archaeology with earth energy science to uncover the hidden frequencies emitted by the planet. Her work explores how ancient civilizations harness these energies, and she aims to apply their wisdom to modern life. Maria, did I leave anything out there?
No, that was perfect. Flawless.
Well, Maria, one of the things I wanted to start off with was dowsing. I know what dowsing is, but maybe for our audience here, can you explain what that is and how you got involved with dowsing?
Absolutely. I mean, I was really brought up with dowsing, so it was, part of my family life, so to speak, going to ancient sites and looking for curiosities. What is dowsing? Well, we normally think of dowsing being associated with water divining, for example, but we can move on from that to earth energies, grid lines, and other things besides. But for me, dowsing is forming a relationship between an ancient site, the ancestral past, and earth energies, and making that relationship to Gaia. And I think that gives us a wonderful connection to the planet. So for me, it's not just about finding an earth energy, it's about working with that. Some are healing, some give us energy. And if we can understand, just like the ancients did, they really understood the earth, then we can use them and apply them to our modern day lives.
One of the things that I find fascinating is not that there are stone structures around the planet, is that there's so many of them. And I've spoken with certain people that show that there's a large percentage of them that run across certain lines. And to me, it doesn't seem like they would just do this arbitrarily. So there must be some sort of a purpose beyond just a worship temple. I'm sure they did worship it. I'm sure that it was very sacred to them. But I'm having the suspicion that there's some sort of functionality behind here that maybe it provided some sort of benefit beyond just the spiritual for people. Can you talk about some of these benefits that maybe you've discovered? Does it increase crop yield? What are some of these benefits do you think that they were taking advantage of?
Well, first of all, there isn't just lines. People get fixated with ley lines and leave out earth energies. And it's the earth energies that are far more powerful for a place because the line connects it to other sites worldwide. But it's also about the power of place. And certain earth energies prevail as a design canon in those temple spaces. For example, a lot of them are sited beneath groundwater aquifers and much, much deep aquifers that release spiral patterns. And these spiral patterns, called a geospiral or a multiple geospiral, we've measured their, frequencies, and they can be very healing. For example, and they can change our brain waves. Last year alone, I was rigged up with what's called the mind mirror. What's that? Imagine both sides of my hemisphere of my brain are being measured. Am I in alpha mode? Am I in beta mode? And that type of thing. And I'm biased in stone's megalithic energy. So we have earth energy. And imagine that a stone or a structure is sighted into that earth energy pattern. It starts to interact with that energy. So it becomes megalithic energy, like a bit like an acupuncture needle goes into a meridian line. If we see it like that, and then it starts to release these energy patterns that are megalithic energy, and we measured those against brainwaves, and they put us into delta and gamma. Gamma that comes from the Monroe Institute is really powerful. And that's what it does. It can change our brainwaves and put us into a healing frequency mode, for example. Whereas some earth energies can increase our ability to think because they all relate and release a certain Hertz frequency. And we can analyze that Hertz frequency. So to get back to your question about what are they used for, they're multifaceted. They're not just one thing. You can have healing experiences there, raise your consciousness, attune to the planet, to name but a few. But it certainly does seem that the particular frequencies emitted from megaliths or pillars in Egyptian temples, for example, can change our brainwaves. So we can interact with that place.
So, I mean, clearly there was people that were able to locate these spots on the planet, a long time ago. And so it, I hear people talk about this all the time. I think there's people alive today that can very much sense these things. And I find it intriguing because I don't think I can. But I've heard enough and I've seen enough from respected individuals that have, like yourself, decades of timing with this topic. And I know that there's something there. And so my question is like, is it that our culture, or is it the way that we live now, where that sort of sense has devolved a little bit, and that some people maybe just have it a little bit more than others, and they're going to these places and they're claiming, hey, look, there's something else going on here, that they didn't just build this arbitrarily. What has happened to? I mean, I don't know if you can answer this question, but what has happened to people where there's such this cognitive dissonance where they look at this topic and they say, I can't see that, therefore it's not there.
This is where I come in, because I'm saying I can sense it, I can douse it. People expect me to hold dowsing rods, but I can actually sense it. But I went out of my way to prove it by putting copper probes into the ground and saying, look, this is what we're getting. Look what's happening to my brainwaves. It's putting me into a delta brainwave, for example. So I think I have proved it beyond reasonable doubt. I've also proved megalithic energy comes out the stones at particular frequencies that we can't necessarily hear. It's called infrasound. It's a bit, lower than the normal 20 hertz that you hear, but it comes out at 18 hertz. And I think our ancestors that I discovered around Stonehenge that had elongated shaped skulls could certainly hear that. So we're experiencing ancient sites visually and through our senses. I think our ancient ancestors used all of their senses. They could hear, they could see, they could sense, and they were more in tune with those sites.
Let's talk about your discovery at Stonehenge, because you mentioned the elongated skulls, and I know this is something that has been found in South America. I know that there's head binding for people that were trying to emulate most likely something that they saw. And can we talk about your discovery there at Stonehenge with the elongated skulls?
Yes, I mean, it's about 10 years ago now that I found my first elongated skull by reading archaeological reports that were very unusual and deciding to go to Cambridge University to actually see the skull and measure the femur bones to ascertain the height of the person. And it was very clear that it was an elongated skull, which I photographed. So, the proof is in the pudding, as they
Mhm.
say. I photographed numerous skulls after that. It appears in the Stonehenge landscape and the British Isles, generally speaking, that there was a natural form of long skull. That is clear, that is evident. But some, probably the priesthood or the ruling elite that were placed into prestigious burial chambers, for example, extended their already long skulls even further, which I call the hyper elongated, against the lesser elongated, which is the natural skull shape. So there was some manipulation of that skull size and shape. And interestingly, because of their skull size, as I point out in my books, their ear placements seem to be set further back, giving them an almost fairy-like, fey, elfin look. So I think some of the fairy tales and stories about the fae do come from the ancient prehistoric people, as did the tall people that came after them and were buried in round barrows that had round skulls. They were much, much taller and robust. And they too had a certain amount of manipulation of their skulls, making them rounder as well. I had a lot of evidence for that. So we think of the past as having two cultures, First of all, there was the elongated skulled people. Later came the taller, round skulled people who seemed to have, they were fighting for probably Stonehenge because a lot of the long skulled were murdered and placed into what's called long barrels, for instance. So it has a very checkered history around Stonehenge. But in Orkney, which is much northern, heading towards Scotland and beyond, in an island called Orkney. It was the women there that had the elongated, extended skulls. So there was clearly a priestesshood in Orkney, as I do believe there was around Stonehenge originally.
Fascinating. Can we talk about sacred geometry for a second and the astronomical alignments? Because I've been looking at this long enough, and there is a consistent amount of sacred geometry, sacred proportions and harmonics all around these ancient structures and even cathedrals as well. Can we talk about that for a second? And what do you see the significance of this as?
Oh, absolutely. We can talk about that. Only on Sunday, I was leading a tour with the UK's foremost sacred geometrist, who I work with at least once or twice a year, Daniel Doherty. So I'm very aware of sacred geometry. He's been a tutor of mine.
Is he a pupil of like Keith Critchlow in that
He's
school?
the top pupil of Keith Critchlow.
Got it. Why do you are they using these sacred geometric proportions and harmonics to help amplify the already existing anomalous energy or magnetic anomaly is the coming out of the ground? Is that part of the purpose?
The interesting thing about the sacred geometry of a place like Stonehenge or other places besides, I'm saying Stonehenge because everybody is familiar with that ancient site. It needs no introduction. The earth energy patterns there are very circular. Stonehenge has 6 circular features, and all of those are sited on a natural earth energy pattern that has 6 circular features. Now, Pythagoras and Kepler discovered the music of the spheres. The distance between the planets and their orbital paths created musical harmonics and mathematical ratios. That was their discovery. Legend has it Pythagoras could hear the music of the spheres. Kepler informs us that the soul can still hear it. Regardless, at Stonehenge, the earth can manifest through earth energies these musical harmonics and ratios. And the ancestors were looking for these circular patterns that emit that and placed Stonehenge and other sites upon it. So, as well as having mathematical sacred geometry, you have Gaia's natural sacred geometry. Put the two together, and you have a resonance like no other. For example, if I stood at Stonehenge between the lintelled circle and the bluestone circle, that ratio, that distance between one to the other, equates to the major third, 5/4. And churches sing in the major third because it lifts your emotions up in cathedrals and churches alike. The Masons used E flat quite commonly. They used other notes besides, but that was their musical ratio. So they tried to incorporate that into their lodges. So I see 2 forms of sacred geometry, one in which the earth admits and one which is mathematical proportions that we can draw. For example, Alexander Thom discovered he was very famous in introducing the megalithic yard, for example, but he also looked at the sacred geometry of the flattened circle. And people like Daniel and myself, we can draw that sacred geometry. That's mathematical. Place that above the natural harmonics, and you really do have the music of the earth singing to the soul.
Amazing. I want to get into some of these photos that you sent me that are all around, America's Stonehenge and these other things that you discover, which are really amazing. Before we do that, one quick question. Did you ever cross paths with John Michel?
Yes, I was at a book launch with John Michel, my late father, who was a master dowser, knew John very well. So yes, John Michel was, a friend of my father's, more so than myself, but certainly I met him upon occasion. I've met all of the top people that worked with people like Keith Critchlow, and I know Keith Critchlow's daughter as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about John Michel and Keith ad nauseum on this podcast, but I just think that some of the work he did over the decades in metrology and decoding some of the ancient sites and sacred geometry was just truly mind blowing. And I think he opened the door for a lot of people to kind of look at these topics and go to another level with it. So yeah, I'm always curious when I run across people that knew him because I never got a chance to meet him, but I've read a lot of his books and huge fan. Let's go into some of these photos that you sent me. I want to know where some of these are and what you've discovered here.
Yes, that's at America's Stonehenge, and it's been amplified by having some kind of chalk paint put around the outside, and that's intrigued the owner and archaeologists. When we turn to England to have a look at what is this? It's like a curved area that has a channel. You can't see all of that channel, it's just pointing towards it that collects water. We call that in the UK stoops. And stoop's a bit like a font to a Christian. You put water in it and it becomes holy water. So I think they were gathering these channels of water at America's Stonehenge to give some really unusual hydromancy, that's water divination rites that we're having a look at in some of the other stones. But this baffles them. But when we look at how ancients were using them in the UK and across Europe, it becomes clear that this has been purposely designed to gather water.
How big is this? And where is America Stonehenge?
America's Stonehenge is in New Hampshire near a place called Salem, and it's on a hill. It used to be called Mystery Hill prior to being renamed America's Stonehenge. I really like Mystery Hill. That's my favorite interpretation because it doesn't look anything like Stonehenge in the UK. But this is quite a reasonably big area. It would cover sort of about 5 or 6 inches across. And that's about the same size that's used for blessing water at some of these sites across the UK.
So is this on the side of a rock here?
No, it's on the flat side. If you imagine there's a flat rock like that and it's being carved around, that's what
Okay.
we are looking at. It's a flat, horizontal piece of stone. And normally these stones are placed above some kind of healing energy in terms of earth energy, and it's charging up that water. And later we'll see how it was applied to other stones at America's Stonehenge.
Interesting. So let's go to the second picture here. Let me know when you can see this one here. Oop.
Here we're looking at two parallel painted lines, again, emphasizing the collection of water. Now, some people interpret this as a drainage system, but if we look to the sacredness of place, we can see how this water is going to be used as it was at healing sites in the British Isles that I will point out later. It's again channeling water into particular areas of this vast site. America's Stonehenge contains stone chambers, a bit like what we would call in the British Isles, long barrows, megalithic chambers, areas that you can enter that are quite fantastic. It has been dated to around 2000 BC, making it about 4,000 years old. And certain features here have intrigued the archaeologists. And I'm pointing out that I think this is leading to very sacred healing rites that are performed elsewhere 500 years preceding America's Stonehenge in the Celtic Isles.
Amazing. Okay. This to me is a little bit interesting. You got to tell me the story behind what's going on with this. What is under here?
We're looking at now, it looks like a piece of wood with a wire on it, but it's covering up a well, a sacred spring area that could be collecting water through a spring that may have dried up, and now it can collect snowmelt and rainwater. Again, this has baffled the archaeologists. Why put a well here? Because it's close to a natural area of water. So why would you need that? But they deliberately marked this area out to collect the water. And so what we're seeing is a water temple at America's Stonehenge, placed carefully above earth energies to charge this water up. That's in all churches and cathedrals alike as well. You have the holy water placed above healing water spirals. It charges it up to a different level. Water is sacred. And at ancient sites, you have these very, very deep aquifers that I call yin water because it's water produced within the earth independent of rainfall. I'm a second generation esoteric water diviner, and throughout all our teachings, it's said that the earth can produce her own type of water, and where she does, she emits a spiral pattern. You can have rainfall aquifers as well. This is marking bone. So it's a very holy place. So it's like a holy well that we're looking at, not just a dip in the ground that's been covered up.
How big is the complex at America's Stonehenge?
It covers many acres, it really does. And if you include the serpentine walls that are quite a curiosity, these are walls that look like serpents and they go for up to 2,500 feet, meandering in the landscape, marking serpentine currents that can be male or female. So we look at ley lines in the UK as being entwined by a male and a female earth current. In the US, you tend to look at them just as lines. We look at them as being a ley system with these currents entwined in them. So they can go on for thousands of feet beyond the chambers.
If it's all right, I just want to pull up I mean, I know you have other photos of this location, but I was just pulling it up on Google. Do you mind if we just look at some of these bigger pictures of the whole complex?
Sure.
I want to take a look at this real quick just so people can see this, what we're looking at here. So this would be one area, correct?
Yes, this is an area inside of the entire complex that it's built on top of rock, for example, very hard rock, and the stones were placed in a particular manner to create inner chambers. Some of it is ruinous and has slipped with what you're looking at. But originally that would have been covered area. So you're entering these sacred chambers that in the UK have been tested for sound frequency resonance. And what we're looking at now is the sacrificial table. I don't think it's got anything to do with human or animal sacrifice. Not so at all, because I found in Wales a very similar stone called St. Cannon's stone, which was next to a healing well. Well, I've just shown you a healing well, haven't I? I've shown you where a well was. And a stone almost identical, which I've sent to you, that has these ridges around the outside. And what we're looking at here is the similarity between the so-called sacrificial table at America's Stonehenge, which is at the bottom, and it now lies flat with the ridges carved in around it. And above, we see St. Cannon's stone in Wales, which is very similar, but at an angle, located next to a well, which the same as at America's Stonehenge. And they used to place water around the outside and get people to lie down on the holy stone. I think this should be renamed as the altar stone because I don't think it's being used for sacrifice and to gather blood around at all. It's above the healing spiral I was talking to you about earlier. It's deliberately placed above that as a design canon, and it's imbuing that stone with healing frequency and energy. So I would say this is a healing place. And when we use these emotive words like sacrificial, they stay and they invoke a negative side to the site. But clearly, what I think is going on here, Matt, I think the sacrificial stone, or the altar stone as I call it, was at a slight angle originally. This site is slightly ruinous. And who's to say it wasn't slightly raised to be like St. Cannon's stone and to allow the water to run around it? And in the area of Wales, after you laid down on the stone, you would receive healing. And hundreds of people did that across time. When I got people, I had private access to the sacrificial stone. I got people to lie down on it and say, how are you feeling? And everybody said they felt better, relaxed, calm, had visions. So, let's rename these things if they're not appropriate, or at least offer an alternative interpretation. And I think I've provided some very good evidence in the similarities between healing stones of Wales and the sacrificial stone of America's Stonehenge.
Amazing. Let's look at another photo here. So we did that one. Let's look at this one here. Now, is this in America's Stonehenge as well?
This is a very intriguing feature in America's Stonehenge. It is called the Oracle Chamber. The Oracle Chamber has several features, one of which is called the Tube. And it's literally like an opening in the stone with an area that goes down a couple of feet. And if you spoke through that, the sound of my voice, if I spoke through it, for example, and we did these tests when I was there, it sounds like it's rising up above the sacrificial table. So the sound being said through the oracle chamber rises up through the sacrificial altar stone. And also in the oracle room, you have this what's called a bed area where you could sit or lie down. There's ledges there, and it's like a long stone corridor. And we call these in the United Kingdom long barrows. And I think some of the long barrows in the United Kingdom had these oracle features too. But how magical that would have seemed if you were, offering healing and singing and mantra rather than just talking, and you could get those sound resonance going in relationship to the natural sound frequencies emitted by those earth energies, which is called the perfect fifth. It has 7 coils, a geospiral, and mathematically equates to the sound of the perfect fifth in musical tones. Now, let's say our ancient ancestors were that sensitive, they were fully aware of how these ancient sites once functioned for a healing aspect. Then I think they would have been using instruments or their voices in absolute harmony with the mathematical ratios emitted by the earth.
Yeah, I mean, if they figured out how to do this and they were aware of this, they would probably try to take great care and great precision to make sure they got this correct, especially if they know that there's a significant benefit for this. So, I mean, it makes sense that they would do this. And then you start to look at all these sites around the world, and they're all using these sort of same harmonic proportions and sacred geometry. And you think, there's got to be a reason why people were investing this. It'd be like if somebody found our civilization 10,000 years from now, they're like, why does everybody have these little rectangular things in their pocket? What are they? What are they using them for, right? And so I think there's probably some sort of function that we just don't 100% understand, but we're starting to pick up these pieces and we're seeing the effects. And so clearly something is going on here.
Absolutely. And you mentioned John Michel earlier. John Michel, in one of his models of Stonehenge, relates it to a 12-pointed star. You get that 12-pointed star in sacred geometry of Michel by moving around the circle 7 times, creating the perfect fifth line, 2/3. That's John Michel. I changed that into a spiral, which equates exactly to John Michel's work. But not only did I do that, I realized that was coming out of the earth as well. So my sacred geometry and earth energies matches John Michel's sacred geometry of Stonehenge and elsewhere. What we're looking at now, Matt, is what's called in America a window. Clearly, we see stones lined up and a gap where you can literally see through that. In the UK, we tend to call those, or geomancers call them, spirit holes. They normally mark the width, the precise width of an earth current or some type of earth energy that flows through it. Now, wherever we get this flow of energy, depending on the type of energy, it can enhance crop growth, as I have proved. I took John Burke's work. He did a lot to do with seed enhancement at ancient sites. And I took it to the next level by looking at what if these seed enhancements could be placed upon this particular energy, that particular energy, etc., etc. And these mark the energy flows that in the UK were the boundaries of fields, or they actually went through Bronze Age field systems, literally irrigating the energies of that place. And if there were seeds planted in that energy field, they grow really prolifically. And I proved this with some seed enhancements tests because I thought John Burke was right for the wrong reason. He went to the center of some ancient sites, placed seeds there, went back to a lab and grew them, and they grew twice as fast and twice as strong. And what I noticed about where he was placing them, they were above these geospiral energy patterns. So I think it was the geospiral energy pattern. And I went to one independent of a sacred site to charge up seeds to test my theory. And yes, they'd seem to charge them up. So if we could get back to that ancient way of agriculture, and I've got a field trial coming up soon, I've been given some land to do a bigger scale study on, I think that we can grow everything in harmony with the earth.
Let me ask you a question. This is something that's been on my mind here for the last several weeks. I've interviewed a couple people that are interested in what's underground. So these underground structures, I'm starting to suspect that this may be, I don't want to say secret because I don't know. I'm not quite sure if there's a cabal hiding this. I mean, maybe there is, but my suspicion is that what's underground, the structures that are underground, may be of more importance than what's actually on top of the ground. Can you speak to that at all? And here's my other suspicion. Maybe you can answer this for me. If there is anomalous energies coming out of the ground from the earth itself, is it more potent the deeper you go? And were people aware of that? So what do you think about those thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, when we look to ancient sites, I'm going to go take you now to the second largest stone circle in the world called Stanton Drew in the English county of Somerset. It's huge. I inherited a lot of surveys done by master dowsers, and it's my legacy. And he plotted and went in the underground tunnels there that led to structures underground. So it's not just beneath the pyramids that we should be looking for. They're underground in most ancient sites. Stonehenge, the world's largest stone circle, has an underground structure. Not far from West Kennet Long Barrow, which is above ground, you have an underground structure which a farmer was ploughing the land, and literally the tractor went into it, kind of collapsed into the structure. And if you have earth energies and you're below ground, and the Druids used to do this, they created a monument in the Iron Age, that's 750 BC, to the Roman invasion of 43 AD. They created a site called a fogu. And a fogu tends to be an underground structure. And there's a brilliant one on Orkney called Mine How. It goes down in a spiral staircase into an underground structure, quite some depth beneath the ground. And the Earth energies there are above what's called an emergence point. What's an emergence point? If you imagine, Matt, that that's the birthplace of an energy coming up like that, that's an emergence point that master dowsers look for. That is really enhanced if you are underground. I'm taking a tour soon, which will be in September the 16th, to Malta. Malta has one of the largest underground structures called the Hypogeum. It's on 3 levels going underground in the limestone. It's exquisitely carved, beautifully so, but more than that, you are literally at these emergence points of energies. Just like the Great Pyramid, what it's cited above, regardless of the Catholic project, whether that's true or not true, I'm on the fence. I always like more evidence, but I'm very happy. And I know that there's something that's going to predate the pyramids under there. What that is a different story. Nonetheless, if we take all of that into consideration, it's at these emergence points So the Earth energy is purer, it's stronger, it's more powerful than sighting it on just a line. You see where we're going now, the difference between lines and Earth currents. And they
Hmm.
come out at a huge frequency that needs to be measured actually on the Giza Plateau. At Stonehenge, for example, you have a similar thing. You have emergence points that come out of the ground, really powerful. And in the Giza Plateau, you have two or three. It's immense. At Stonehenge, you have emergence points, and then you have what's called a convergence point, and that's where Earth energies go into the ground. Yeah, they terminate, they go way, way down deep, and they come back up somewhere else. They're also very powerful points. That's what the ancients were looking for, not just lines, not just spirals, but the emergence points, strong forms of Earth energy that you can measure as well. And that can change the electrostatic field of a monument. For example, in the UK, we have the world's largest man-made mound. It's placed beneath a 7-step pyramid called Silbury Hill near Avebury Henge. And it was eventually smoothed off to make it a white mound because it's chalk beneath the surface of the earth. It's a bit like the pyramids were cased off with limestone, making them glow brilliant white. The same was done where I live. It was with chalk or sometimes limestone as well. So if we imagine it was whitened off with chalk, we took measurements of the electrostatic field at the top of Silbury Hill to the bottom, and it was 1,000 times greater, 1,000 times greater, the electrostatic field. Now, if we noticed it's a layered monument of organic and inorganic, well, that's your classical Wilhelm Reich orgone accumulator. Okay, so it's that as well, Silbury Hill. But if there was a piece of metal placed at the top, be that copper or be that gold, as indeed was on the pyramids themselves, legend has it that if that was the case at Silbury Hill, it would have acted as a capacitor. And at night, because of that electrostatic field anomaly, it would have emitted a blue light. Yeah, that is what engineers and myself have concluded. So I think the pyramids and mounds as well were releasing light at night due to the electrostatic field. Basically, the higher you go, yeah, the electrostatic field becomes greater. And depending on the structure and a piece of metal put on top can release these lights. So I think they were lighting up the light as well and the area surrounding them.
I mean, that must have been, I mean, if you're right, I mean, imagine the spectacular view you were getting at night
Mm.
on the Giza Plateau. If there is light emitting out of that, out of the gold capstone or whatever capstone metal was there used, that would have been an absolute spectacular thing to witness. And then if
Mm.
there's actual physiological benefits for being in the vicinity of these things, of course you're going to have large scale populations gravitating towards this. And if there's effects that, increase the vitality of seed germination and you're able to feed more people doing this, then you start to understand the monumental efforts ancient people put forward to create these things, because this would have been their life force.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Going back to what I said earlier, they're multifaceted. They're not just one thing. They can act on different levels. And that is the creativity and the knowledge and the wisdom of our ancient ancestors. To prove the point about that blue light, Silbury Hill has been disturbed, like the pyramids have been completely disturbed. They're not in situ, they're ruinous to some regard. And Silbury Hill had a shaft put into it, looking for artifacts and things. And even though it has been messed around with in effect, one evening, a person was in the area, just it was a full moon above Silbury Hill. It looked a pretty picture in effect. And he decided to take a shot of it because he then suddenly realized it was emitting partly a blue haze on the top. I think that's the vestiges of how that was designed. So we have photographic evidence that at particular points that amount has emitted light. And I think there's a physics behind that as well. Because when we look at standing stones, you briefly showed a stone at America's Stonehenge that had a sun alignment above the point of it, above the apex. There was the beautiful sun alignment. And Stonehenge is famous with the heel stone aligned to the midsummer sunrise, and thousands go there to witness it. And it's again a sight to behold. But there's a physics behind that. For example, when the sun rises or the sun sets, you have a lot of activity going on. You have red waves, they're really long waves, the red wave. Hence, we see red and the orange hues. More than that, you have radio waves and microwaves all being released at that time. Microwaves can be transduced if they are passed through a piezoelectrical material, and the stones at Stonehenge are, and many other places besides. And then what happens as it's being transduced, it can become pressure waves. So that's how it can be transduced. The electromagnetic energy, in effect, becomes pressure. Push the pressure through the atmosphere, like inside of a stone. Yeah? So it's going through. This can all be clarified by geologists. For instance, it will release ultrasound because the microwaves have been transduced, the wavelength stays the same, but it becomes pressure and it becomes ultrasound released from the stones. And this was recorded by Dr. John Robbins many years ago at a stone circle called Rollright. And Avebury does that. So we're seeing at certain times of the year, normally around the equinoxes, that has been the research done. Stones are releasing ultrasound as well. Again, it's multifaceted. And that ultrasound, intriguingly, went at least 40 yards, 40 meters away from the stone circle. It wasn't going inside of the stone circle. And I think other features like pyramids, like mounds, can also act if they have particular stones and piezoelectrical material inside can also emit ultrasound.
So you mentioned multifaceted there. One of the things I wanted to touch on, the piezoelectric energy you're talking about. I've been told that that's what the casing stones were kind of helping to contain, right? Because they're an insulator. And then you
Yeah.
have the granite, which has crystal quartz in it, which is highly piezoelectric. It can conduct that electricity. So if you're harvesting this energy, harvesting these electrons, and you want to pressurize it and want to capture it, you would put some sort of insulator around it, which I guess is what the
Always.
casing stones were. Okay. The other so you mentioned multifaceted. The other thing I wanted to talk about was underground dwellings, right? Because yes, maybe they were going underground to get closer to whatever energy source is coming out, but maybe they were going underground for protection. Do you want to talk about precession and, possible things that have happened on the planet in the past that they were aware of, and so they were seeking refuge? Do you think that's a thing?
Any civilization that wants to survive will do certain things for that survival modality. That's, goes without reason. And of course, we have, experts like Dr. Robert Schoch saying there could be these storms, or even if it was a meteorite storm, that eventually, cascades into the earth at particular times, you are going to seek refuge below ground. And I also think that some of the structures across Europe that have these underground features could have been used in effect as air raid shelters, so to speak, in times of trouble and in times of calamity, for example. Now, what I researched for my book on the secret history of Stonehenge is that particular times the moon can behave differently. We all know about a lunar eclipse, don't we? We all know about a lunar eclipse. It goes blood red, and it's a fantastic sight to behold. If there has been a lot of volcanic activity, like in 1155 BC, a volcano erupted violently so in Iceland called Hekla 3. gateway to hell in the Icelandic language. And it spewed out a lot of dust and material, and it had a nuclear winter in the UK. Yeah. And that coincided with what's called a black moon. And that's when all of that debris, that dark debris that's filling up and creating a nuclear winter, makes the moon go deadly black. The eclipse, I discovered, coincided with the end of the megalithic culture in England, especially around Stonehenge and Avebury. That's another time I think that underground areas were utilized and to recharge up seeds, to reboot what was, in occurrence, because they couldn't grow food. It was a terrible time because it's baffled archaeologists, Matt. Well, why did everything stop being built around 1100 BC? And that's why I realized that it was coinciding with that eclipse. Stonehenge, according to Gerald Hawkins, was an eclipse predictor. The Aubrey Hole stage 1, I think that was still in use by 1155 BC, that predicted a black eclipse, but they had probably no idea that Hecla 3 was exploding, because it used to be thought that it was Santorini in Greece that erupted, but now we've got better science. You can analyze the debris, and it definitely came from Iceland. So again, we're looking at cultures on the brink of survival that are going to reuse anything that has been reused down the line.
Interesting. You mentioned Gerald Hawkins there. Did he come up with the term archaeoastronomy when he was studying Stonehenge and realized that, or is that somebody else that did that?
Well, it was Gerald Hawkins and Newham that were both working on the lunar aspects and the solar aspects of Stonehenge at that time. For instance, and came up with archaeoastronomy, but they were the forerunners of it. They really were. And they realized that you could use eclipse predictors, you could use stones that marked out the moon's metonic cycle. We're in the moon's metonic cycle at the moment. That's when the moon is at its most northerly, and it can't get any more northerly than that. Chimney Rock in Colorado, that beautiful, unusual natural stone setting that has the moon inside it at the moment. And then the moon's metonic cycle is going to end in 2025, around about the time of the winter solstice. Gerald Hawkins poetically called the moon's metonic cycle, when the moon's at its most northerly, the night of the high moon. And I love that. It has a sense of drama about it, because unlike the solstice, where the sun creates, and we're coming up to that, the longest day of daylight, the night of the high moon, the moon's metonic cycle, creates the longest night of moonlight. It's like the opposite. And I discovered at Avebury Henge that is aligned to the moon's metonic cycle. Gerald Hawkins and Newham, they realized that the heel stone was more accurately aligned to the moon at its mid-swing in that cycle that occurs every 9 years. The overall cycle is 18.61 years. Then the sun. So they realized it was a lunar marker, but today everybody goes to Stonehenge at the summer solstice. They should have gone at the mid-swing cycle, because Gerald Hawkins calculated if that coincides with the winter solstice, the moon rising above the tapering crest of the heel stone at that mid-swing, is blood red. It's the eclipse predictor stone.
Fascinating. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up one more thing about Gerald Hawkins. He did discover 5 other geometric theorems based off of crop circles that he had analyzed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I need to do an episode on that alone, because I find that whole topic intrigues me to no end, because the crop circle phenomenon shows up in and around all of these ancient sites.
I live in the middle of crop circle country.
Wiltshire. Yeah, I mean that phenomenon, obviously, it's a highly controversial, a little charged subject, and I've covered it at length on this podcast. But it's obvious that some of these crop circles that are popping up don't show the hallmarks of people using mechanical flattening to bring them down. There's some other sophisticated form of method to create these amazing patterns. And Gerald Hawkins did derive 5 new geometric theorems based on some of the simple circles and the 3 circles which I've done at length on GeoGebra and by hand. So I've checked his math. It definitely works out. But he was obviously a very interesting person and researcher there. I want to switch gears real quick and talk about your work with Dolores Cannon. Can you tell everybody who Dolores Cannon was and how your relationship with her kind of evolved and what you did for her?
To me and many others across the planet, across the world, Dolores Cannon is a great past life regression therapist. She understood past life regression and came up with QHHT. It's a particular form of analyzing, past lives and healing, and it has woven into it a deep understanding of past life regression. That's Dolores Cannon, and she was a prolific writer on the subject and had the experience of no other. That's the thing about Dolores. She had such immense experience. When I had a chat with her once, she'd been doing it since the 60s. Nobody else has that lineage. And her daughter, Julia, has taken over the company. I met Dolores because Dolores was looking for a sacred site guide, and my name popped up. And then when I literally had like an interview with her PA lady, I also had qualified in past life regression, not through Dolores Cannon's method, but through, the British kind of equivalent. So I had past life regression, and I knew about sacred sites and earth energies and where to put people in an ancient site that has the most powerful earth energies. And the priesthood knew that. The priesthood knew which stones to stand around and where to stand in a sacred site to influence their brainwaves. I am convinced, because they're marked by standing stones. Dolores and I just got on like a house on fire. I mean, I thought she was an incredible woman. Yeah, even without all of her past life regression, she was a wisdom keeper, a natural wisdom keeper. And I ended up going to leading them around ancient sites, and learning about Dolores Cannon's take on Stonehenge, Glastonbury Abbey, Avebury, and how that wove into it stories of past life regression as well. So what I learned from Dolores Cannon was another layer to understanding ancient sites through the eyes of regression, through the eyes of looking at the patterns of the past, of what people have said about particular sites. And more than that, what I loved about working with Dolores, she was a good listener. She listened to people's experiences about ancient sites. And she really loved the idea of the earth energies and how people sense them. If I asked people to stand there or stand there, they would sense something there and not there. Do you see what I mean? I can test all of what I say out if you come to a sacred site with me. And so I worked with Dolores for many years after that, and she published some of my books in the States. One of my books on past life astrology that I think is the Druid way of getting past lives. And Dolores tested that system. She doesn't take fools lightly. And my system worked at past life astrology. And she published my Dowsing book in the States as well. And I lectured at her, I think they were in Hawkins. They were in Arkansas, near Ozark Mountains, on the crystal beds there. She used to have conferences there, of which I attended upon occasion.
Fascinating. Maria, this has been a really fascinating conversation. We're going to have you back on so that we can get a little bit deeper into Chaco Canyon and some of these other places around America because it's I've become utterly fascinated with these sites because I think there's just so much more going on here than what most people are aware of, or at least what I'm aware of. And I find the topic endlessly fascinating. So I want to thank you for all of your time and all of your work that you put into this and sharing what you've learned because without people like you, I honestly feel that most of us would be in the dark about this other aspect of these ancient sites. Like you said, they are definitely multifaceted. There's more than one thing going on here. And it's really an honor to talk to someone like you that has all that timing. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody. All right. We're going to do a little bonus section here, Maria, because we were just chatting offline and you noticed the Barbury Castle crop circle behind me. I'm going to pull this up real quick because I want everybody to get a good, clear picture of this one. All right. So can you see the Barbury Castle now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So we were talking offline, and you mentioned that you had been inside of this one and dowsed it. So this came up in 1993, correct?
1991, I think it is.
1991. Sorry. Yes. All right. Tell me what happened.
For example, my late father was alive in that era, and he was one of the first dowsers to douse crop circles and try to really understand them. And Barbury Castle came up. We live quite close to Barbury Castle. Near that crop circle is an Iron Age hill fort called Barbury Castle that was used by the Druids. There's a circular feature that has a really powerful energy about it. So that's beneath an Iron Age Druid monument. Okay. So there's a relationship there. And when we doused it, we got the central area, that central circle that we can see has concentric circles going around it, was set by a particular powerful type of earth energy called a primary halo. That literally was the area that the crop had been laid down, was following the flow of that earth energy pattern, probably isn't coincidental. So that was a really strong energy center. Now, that center seemed to allow the energy through the lines. Can we see a line going down to the bottom circle, for example?
Like
That's
this one.
right. That's the main line there. That's a primary line, as we call in dowsing. That also follows an energy line as if it's funneling and flowing and creating a channel for that energy to go in to charge that bottom circle. The finer lines, because there was thicker and finer lines if you'd gone into that crop circle, and the central circle set above the primary halo was literally feeding into all of those through its lines and through its sacred geometry. People that stood in the center were getting highly charged at that time and feeling almost dizzy at times. And the bottom circle was also highly charged with earth energy. My late father also believed and proved to a certain regard that they were looking for aquifers, these ancient crop circles, the older ones at least, the ones that people think are genuine. And I'm not going to get into genuine and non-genuine
Of course.
debate. But the genuine ones seem to be placed above aquifers that emit these. I was talking about them earlier, coincidentally, with talking about Stonehenge and others, the spiral patterns. They were also placed above that. It was literally like they're marking out all of these deep aquifers. And quite often, where you get two aquifers meeting at Barbury Castle, you get a highly charged electromagnetic field. Imagine two aquifers. They don't have to be exactly the same length. They tend to be above and below each other. That's a charged area, as well as ley lines linking into others. And people were seeing UFO activity at the time around Barbury Castle as well. So
Is
it's an
it
attraction point. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
I said it's almost like they were an attraction point for different sorts of paranormal activity as well. So when we look at crop circles, again, a bit like the stone circles, excuse the pun, you have to look at them through different layers and different experiences and what they triggered in people. And it's interesting to note as well that these crop circles were always close to what we consider over here to be our Area 51, where it's owned by the military. Stonehenge is close to Area 51 in the English terms, and crop circles can be placed around the Salisbury Plain. That's the periphery of that area as well. So it's interesting to know that they're attracted to that area as well.
So you just read my mind because I was going to bring up Salisbury Plain. I've heard, is it true that when the night this thing came down, that the power in and around this area went out?
I don't know about that, to be honest, and I we always are honest. I don't know about that, but in the other areas where there have been genuine crop circles, of which I know and have heard, firsthand. There has been power outage in cottages that live nearby. I know a farmer, for example, on the Salisbury Plain. He rents from the MOD, that's the Military of Defence, your DOD equivalent, and he has crop circles appear on his farm regular. He doesn't advertise them for people to go into because it's his private land, but it seems that they choose certain areas time and time again into which to manifest above.
Fascinating. Did you get into the geometry of this particular formation at all?
Well, what I see, so I was seeing this particular pattern through the eyes of Earth energy. That's where I was coming from. And with my late father as well, he went on to be quite known as a crop circle dowser, so to speak. And what he noticed as well, there were encodements into certain crop circles of worth and merit. And he claimed that's how you could tell a genuine one from a non-genuine one, because they have particular earth energies present. And if they haven't got that formula, which I could go into another time, if they haven't got that particular formula, then they're dead. They're energetically dead. They're linking in to almost like the pulse, the heartbeat of the earth. That's the magical formula.
Fascinating. Maria, I'm really glad that you you were willing to come back on and talk about this formation. I've
Welcome.
talked about it several times on the podcast. I find it so intriguing and so interesting. Again, thanks so much for coming on. I got to have you back on so we can talk some more. This is really cool.
Thank you
Good.
for having me.